Koa, what do you think we should do today?
I think we should put your engine in the car.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I wanted to try something a little different. The SR is finally going in the S13, and I figured I'd try a little voiceover, the footage of the engine going in the car. So let's jump right into it. So let's start out by removing the intake plenum to get it ready for final install. Here I'm just pulling off the painter's tape that was there just to keep the engine more sealed while it sat awaiting to go back in the car. Now, instead of a normal OEM gasket, I decided to use a thermal gasket from Siki. They sealed this gasket in the packaging pretty good. I've ran similar thermal gaskets on the KAT for the FC, and are there really performance gains from this? I'm sure if there are, it's probably minimal, but the concept is there. Less heat transfer from the head of the engine to the intake plenum should translate to cooler intake air temps and thus better performance. So with the thermal gasket in place, the intake plenum can go back on, throwing on all new bolts for the plenum so that I can take the old ones and eventually get them re-zinc plated for maybe a future project. Now, whenever I'm at this extent in a build, I try to torque everything to spec. And I realize just how difficult that can be sometimes to get a torque wrench into some places. In this case, I needed to pull off the fuel rail in order to torque all the bolts down for the plenum. Here's Koa just hanging out during wrench time. Does anyone else's dog like to just sit directly in the way when you're trying to do stuff? Because Koa loves doing that. But anyways, on to torquing the intake plenum bolts. So I'm just torquing in sequence from middle outwards. FSM states 12 to 15 foot-pounds. Generally, if I'm reusing the original hardware, I try to fall in the middle of the recommended torque specs, like 13 foot-pounds. But since we're using new bolts, I went on the higher end of that at 15 foot-pounds. I also make it a habit that once I've made one pass, I do a second pass just to double check everything is torqued. So now the fuel rail can go back in. Don't worry, the injector O-rings are still lubricated from recently being installed, so they slipped right into place. Now it's just a matter of installing the fuel rail bolts with their spacers and torquing those down. I ended up torquing those down to 15 foot-pounds as well. And lastly, just tightening up the bracket that braces the underside of the plenum, and we're done. Now the hot side. So on goes a multi-layer metal exhaust manifold gasket from Tomei. If you ever end up changing the stock gasket, make sure you go for a multi-layer metal one like this one. I've even reused these multi-layer metal gaskets before without any issue, so I'd highly recommend for any SR20. Next, the Artec top mount V-band turbo manifold. Same thing on this side. I got all new stainless nuts and studs installed, and I'm excited to see how this manifold performs. On my Kuki, I ran a stock cast manifold forever, and I loved how durable it was. That's one of the key benefits when it comes to cast manifolds. They'll pretty much last forever. Prior to that, I had a DC Sports tubular manifold on my Kuki, which performed and sounded great, but it eventually cracked. It's something kind of unavoidable really with tubular manifolds. They just see so much heat and carry so much weight, not to mention when you bottom out your exhaust from being low, tubular manifolds are just prone to cracking after a while. That's where the RTEC manifold combines the best of both worlds. The durability of a cast manifold along with the performance and flow of a tubular manifold. Also, it being V-bands for serviceability. If you've ever owned an SR20, you've dealt with the dreaded blowing of turbo gaskets and nuts backing off. And with a V-band, you don't have to deal with any of that. Anyways, same thing here, just torquing everything from middle outwards. FSM states 27 to 35 foot-pounds. So again, with new nuts and studs, I went on the higher end of the spectrum at 35 foot-pounds. It's actually really nice how easy it is to access all the nuts with this manifold. Now on goes the oil feed line for the turbo. I basically wanted to tighten all the lines on the block with the engine out of the car just for convenience. Next, onto the clutch. So in goes a new pilot bushing, just using a socket the same size to tap the bushing in evenly. With that installed, we're ready for the clutch. So I decided to go with a Exedi Hyper Single. I wanted something streetable, but also something able to hold some decent torque. Previously, in my Kuki, I ran also Exedi clutch, but it was the Stage 2 3-puck, which was decent for the power that it was making. So on goes the flywheel. I'm just turning one flywheel bolt in to hold the flywheel in place. And from there, I applied some orange Loctite to each bolt that's going in. If there's anything you don't want your flywheel bolts coming loose on you. Now it's just a matter of running them in snug with the Milwaukee ratchet in a star pattern, and then on to torquing all the flywheel bolts down. I ended up just throwing a bolt into one of the transmission bolt holes and using a pry bar to keep the flywheel from spinning while torquing. So I torqued everything down to 66 foot-pounds, and next the clutch disc can go on. Using the clutch alignment tool that came with the kit, I placed the clutch disc in place and the pressure plate can go on next. So same procedure as putting the flywheel on. I just used some of the pressure plate bolts just to hold the pressure plate on, and then each bolt I put in got a little bit of orange Loctite on them. From there, I just slowly turn them in bit by bit in a star pattern so the pressure plate fingers can evenly clamp down, just torquing them to 23 foot-pounds with 2 passes, and that's it. The clutch is installed. Now on to the transmission. Pulling off the old clutch fork and throwout bearing and just pressing on the new one with the shop press. Now just reinstalling the throwout bearing and the clutch fork, checking movement, and we are good to go. Now I forgot to hit record putting the transmission on, but it went on relatively easily. In go the transmission bolts. I think I only had 4 to hold it on for now. I ended up digging in the bolt bins for more off camera. It's actually funny, I actually only ran 4 main transmission bolts, plus 2 starter bolts in my Kuki years ago. Comment down below if you have an S chassis. Do you run all your transmission bolts, or do you leave some out in case you ever need to pull the transmission? So with the transmission bolted on, it's ready to go into the car. Now, I'd say it went in pretty smoothly with all things considered. My engine crane is definitely outdated, but it does the job and it was technically free. Slowly but surely, bit by bit, we were getting the engine closer to being where it needed to be. One of the quirks with this engine crane is that with the arm extended fully, it wants to topple. In hindsight, I could have extended the legs out further, but we were already committed at this point. So onward we go. A little more gentle persuading and nudging, and we got the engine mounts to sit in the crossmember. At this point, we just have to get a jack underneath to raise up the back of the transmission. As you can see, Koa is peeking under to supervise, I suppose. He's staring real hard. At this point, we just had to thread on the engine mount nuts. I think Koa may have fallen asleep at this point. But with the nuts on, up we go with the hoist, and it was on to tackle the transmission mount. And just like that, the engine and trans are officially in the car. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit the like button. And if you're not subscribed, make sure you hit the subscribe button. I know this was a little bit different than how I normally do my videos, but I just really wanted to get this car going as it's almost mid-June and I really gotta hustle. So I'll see you guys in the next video. There's an engine in the background.